This person may be armed with a firearm. There would be someone out there who knows where he is or may know where he is, and we'll just call upon those persons.
A quiet Sydney neighborhood became the center of a devastating crime when police responding to reports of a domestic disturbance made a grim discovery inside a family home. Authorities have confirmed that Aisha Khan, a 34-year-old woman, was found dead inside the residence she shared with her husband. Within hours, detectives from NSW Police force arrested and charged Imran Khan, 38, with her murder. Police say officers were called to the property following concerns raised about a domestic incident. What they encountered inside triggered an immediate homicide investigation, sealing off the home as forensic teams moved in to document the scene and collect evidence. The death of Aisha Khan has since been confirmed as a domestic violence-related killing, placing the case among Australia's most serious and closely watched criminal matters. Court records show that Imran Khan has been charged with murder and refused bail, meaning he will remain in custody as the legal process unfolds. Prosecutors allege the evidence gathered at the scene was sufficient to justify the charge, though authorities stress that these remain allegations to be tested in court. The case has sent shockwaves through the community and reignited urgent conversations across Australia about domestic violence, warning signs, and the tragic consequences that can unfold behind closed doors. Friends and neighbors have described the situation as unimaginable, while advocates point to the case as another reminder of how quickly domestic disputes can turn fatal. This is not just the story of a charge, it is the story of a life lost inside what should have been the safest place of all, and a justice system now tasked with determining what happened next. In the early hours of an ordinary day in Sydney, a call for help set in motion a chain of events that would end with one life lost and another forever altered. Police were dispatched to a suburban home after reports of a domestic disturbance, an incident that, on the surface, appeared no different from countless others officers respond to each year. What they found inside, however, would quickly escalate the situation into one of the most serious criminal investigations under Australian law. Inside the house, police discovered the body of Aisha Khan, a 34-year-old woman. Emergency services were called, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. The home was immediately sealed off, and detectives from the NSW Police force launched a homicide investigation, treating the property as a major crime scene. Within hours, police arrested Aisha Khan's husband, Imran Khan, aged 38. He was formally charged with murder and later refused bail, meaning he will remain in custody as the case proceeds through the New South Wales court system. Police have emphasized that the charge reflects the seriousness of the evidence gathered during the initial response and forensic examination, but they also stress that the matter will now be determined by the courts. The discovery sent shockwaves through the local community. Neighbors described police vehicles lining the street, forensic officers moving in and out of the house, and a heavy, unsettling silence replacing what had been a quiet residential setting. For many, the realization that a fatal act of violence had occurred behind familiar doors was deeply unsettling. According to police, officers were responding to concerns raised about a domestic incident at the property. Domestic disturbance calls are among the most complex and dangerous situations police face, often involving heightened emotions, conflicting accounts, and rapidly evolving circumstances. In this case, officers quickly realized the situation was far more serious than initially reported. Once the scene was secured, specialist forensic teams began their work. Inside domestic homicide investigations, every detail matters. The layout of rooms, the position of objects, and the condition of the scene can all provide critical information about what occurred. Photographs were taken, evidence was cataloged, and items of interest were removed for further analysis. These early steps are foundational. Mistakes at this stage can have lasting consequences for any future prosecution. Police have not publicly released details about the cause of death, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation and the need to protect the integrity of court proceedings. A post-mortem examination was conducted as standard procedure, with results provided to investigators and prosecutors rather than disclosed publicly. This restraint reflects both legal requirements and ethical considerations, particularly in cases involving family members. As news of the charge spread, attention quickly turned to the broader issue of domestic violence in Australia. Advocates and officials alike noted that many fatal domestic incidents are preceded by warning signs, arguments, disturbances, or escalating patterns of control and conflict. While police have not confirmed any prior history involving this couple, the case has reignited debate about how domestic violence is identified, reported, and addressed before it reaches a fatal outcome. For investigators, the focus remains on evidence rather than narrative. Detectives are working to establish a clear timeline of events leading up to Aisha Khan's death. This involves examining phone records, witness statements, and any available digital evidence. In domestic cases, timelines can be particularly complex, as much of what occurs happens in private, without independent witnesses. Neighbors and others in the area have been interviewed as part of routine inquiries. Police typically ask about sounds, disturbances, or unusual activity in the hours or days before an incident. Even seemingly minor observations can help corroborate or challenge accounts given by those directly involved. Officers have also reviewed any available CCTV from surrounding properties or nearby streets to map movements around the time of the incident. The arrest and charge of Imran Khan marked a significant step in the legal process. In New South Wales, murder charges carry the most severe penalties available under criminal law. The decision to refuse bail reflects a judicial assessment that the case meets strict criteria, including the seriousness of the alleged offense and considerations of public safety and flight risk. Legal experts note that the refusal of bail does not indicate guilt, but it does underscore the gravity of the allegations. The accused will have the opportunity to challenge the prosecution's case through legal counsel, and all evidence will be tested in court. The presumption of innocence remains a cornerstone of the Australian justice system. For the family and loved ones of Aisha Khan, the days following her death have been marked by grief and shock. Police family liaison officers are typically assigned in such cases to support relatives, explain legal processes, and provide updates as the investigation and court proceedings unfold. While public attention often focuses on charges and hearings, families endure a much quieter, more painful process away from cameras and headlines. Domestic homicide cases often prompt difficult public conversations. Each incident raises questions about what interventions might have been possible and whether warning signs were missed. Experts caution, however, that not all domestic violence is visible to outsiders, and many victims suffer in silence due to fear, stigma, or lack of support. These realities complicate efforts to prevent such tragedies, even as they underscore the need for continued awareness and resources. Police and government officials have reiterated messages encouraging anyone experiencing domestic violence to seek help. In Australia, support services and hotlines operate nationwide, offering confidential assistance. While such messages cannot undo what has happened in this case, they reflect an ongoing effort to reduce harm and save lives. As the investigation continues, prosecutors will work closely with police to prepare the case for court. This involves reviewing forensic findings, assessing witness credibility, and ensuring all evidence has been lawfully obtained. In serious cases, this preparation can take months, as the stakes are high and the margin for error is small. The first court appearances are procedural rather than substantive, focused on confirming charges and managing custody arrangements. Over time, hearings will address the admissibility of evidence, the scope of testimony, and the timetable toward trial. Each step is governed by strict rules designed to ensure fairness for all parties involved. For the community, the case has left an indelible mark. Domestic violence often unfolds away from public view, making its consequences feel sudden and incomprehensible when they emerge. Neighbors who once exchanged greetings now find themselves reflecting on how little anyone may truly know about what happens inside another person's home. As Sydney absorbs the reality of this case, the focus remains on the legal process ahead. A woman has lost her life, a man stands accused of her murder, and the justice system must now determine what happened and who is responsible under the law. This first stage of the story is defined by facts rather than conclusions. A death following a domestic disturbance, an arrest, and a charge. What comes next will unfold in court, where evidence will be examined in detail and the truth sought through due process. For now, the case stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences domestic violence can have, and of the responsibility borne by institutions, communities, and individuals to confront it before it turns fatal. As the case moved beyond the immediate shock of the discovery, investigators began the slow and exacting work required to transform a crime scene into a prosecutable case. Domestic homicide investigations are among the most complex matters police handle, not because they lack urgency, but because so much of what matters happens in private. With few direct witnesses and highly charged emotional contexts, detectives must rely on evidence that speaks quietly but clearly. From the outset, police focused on reconstructing the timeline leading up to the death of Aisha Khan. Establishing when events unfolded and in what sequence is critical. Investigators examine phone activity, messages, call logs, and any digital footprints that may indicate communication or escalation before officers were called to the home. In domestic cases, even small gaps in time can become central to understanding intent and circumstance. Forensic analysis continues in parallel. Items removed from the house are examined in specialist laboratories, where results can take weeks to finalize. These examinations are not limited to determining cause of death. They also help establish how events occurred within the space. Patterns, placement, and condition of objects can corroborate or contradict accounts later given in interviews. Police have not disclosed these findings publicly, reflecting both legal constraints and respect for the victim's family. The accused, Imran Khan, remains in custody after being refused bail. Under New South Wales law, bail refusal in a murder case reflects judicial consideration of multiple factors, including the seriousness of the charge and community safety. It does not determine guilt, but it underscores the gravity of the allegations and the court's assessment at this early stage. During this period, detectives conduct formal interviews under strict procedural rules. Statements are taken, clarified, and revisited as evidence emerges. Legal representation ensures that the process remains fair, even as investigators probe inconsistencies and test explanations against physical and digital findings. This adversarial balance is deliberate, designed to prevent error while allowing truth to emerge. Police also speak with neighbors, acquaintances, and anyone who may have had contact with the household in the days prior. Domestic violence often leaves traces beyond the home: raised voices overheard, disturbances noticed, or changes in routine observed. Investigators treat these accounts carefully, understanding that recollections may be fragmented or influenced by hindsight. Corroboration becomes the key standard. The broader community response has been subdued but attentive. Vigils and messages of condolence reflect grief and solidarity, while advocacy groups have renewed calls for vigilance and support for those experiencing domestic violence. In Australia, domestic homicide remains a deeply concerning issue, and each case brings renewed focus to prevention, reporting, and early intervention. Authorities have been careful to avoid speculation about the couple's history. While some domestic homicide cases involve prior reports or known patterns, others do not. Police have not confirmed any previous involvement by authorities in this case, emphasizing that conclusions must be grounded in evidence rather than assumption. This restraint is critical to maintaining the integrity of proceedings. As prosecutors begin preparing the case, the standard they must meet is exacting. To proceed, they must be satisfied that the evidence offers a realistic prospect of conviction and that prosecution is in the public interest, criteria that are rigorously applied in serious matters. This review involves close collaboration with investigators and careful assessment of every evidentiary strand. The legal process now unfolds at a measured pace. Initial court appearances are procedural, addressing custody status and scheduling. Substantive hearings, where evidence admissibility and scope are debated, will follow. Each step is governed by rules intended to protect rights and ensure fairness, even as the public seeks answers. For Aisha Khan's family, the passage of time can feel especially heavy. The shift from investigation to court proceedings often brings renewed pain, as details are revisited in formal settings. Support services and liaison officers remain involved, providing guidance through a process that can be both confusing and emotionally draining. The case also highlights the challenges faced by first responders. Domestic disturbance calls are unpredictable, and officers must make rapid assessments in volatile environments. Training and protocols are designed to mitigate risk, but outcomes can still be tragic. Police leadership has reiterated commitments to continuous improvement while acknowledging the limits of intervention once violence escalates. Public discussion continues to emphasize the importance of support pathways. National helplines and local services are repeatedly highlighted by officials and advocates, underscoring that help is available and that early contact can be life-saving. These messages are not a commentary on this case's specifics, but a response to its broader implications. As weeks pass, attention may shift, but the legal work intensifies. Evidence is organized, expert opinions prepared, and timelines refined. Each detail must be ready to withstand scrutiny in court, where conclusions are drawn not from emotion, but from proof. This stage of the story is about preparation rather than pronouncement. The charge has been laid, custody determined, and the machinery of justice set in motion. What remains is the careful testing of evidence and argument that defines a fair trial. Sydney, like many cities, carries the weight of such cases quietly. Streets return to routine, homes close their doors, and life continues. Yet the reality that a fatal act occurred within a private space lingers, shaping conversations about safety, support, and responsibility. As the case moves forward, the focus will narrow to what can be established beyond reasonable doubt. That standard is demanding by design. It exists to ensure that outcomes, whatever they may be, are just, defensible, and grounded in fact. As the case advances deeper into the justice system, the emphasis shifts from the immediacy of arrest to the rigor of proof. Investigators and prosecutors now operate in a phase defined less by urgency and more by precision, where every conclusion must be anchored to evidence that can withstand adversarial testing. For the death of Aisha Khan, this stage is about transforming a private tragedy into a legally coherent account, one that explains what happened, how it happened, and why criminal responsibility is alleged. Domestic homicide cases often hinge on reconstruction. Unlike public incidents with multiple bystanders, much of the relevant conduct occurs away from view. As a result, investigators rely on convergence, independent strands of evidence that, when aligned, point in the same direction. Phone data, timestamps from devices, neighbors' recollections, forensic findings, and scene interpretation are examined together, not in isolation. Consistency across these strands is what prosecutors seek. Inconsistency is what defense counsel will probe. Forensic work remains central at this stage. Items collected from the home are assessed not only for what they reveal individually, but for how they fit spatially and temporally. Analysts look for patterns that can clarify sequence, what occurred first, what followed, and whether events unfolded in a way that supports or contradicts accounts given during interviews. In domestic settings, where space is constrained and interactions are close, such analysis can be especially informative, though it demands caution to avoid overinterpretation. Interview evidence is treated with equal care. Statements taken early may reflect shock or confusion. Later statements may be more considered but influenced by memory decay or exposure to information. Investigators compare versions, flagging both consistencies and changes. Prosecutors then assess which elements are reliable, corroborated, and admissible. Defense counsel, in turn, will argue that ambiguity undermines certainty, particularly where interpretation rather than direct observation is involved. The accused, Imran Khan, remains in custody following refusal of bail. This status underscores the seriousness of the charge, but does not determine outcome. In Australian courts, the presumption of innocence remains intact, and the burden rests squarely with the prosecution. Every inference must be justified. Every claim must be supported by evidence capable of meeting the standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt. Pretrial processes now shape the trajectory of the case. Legal teams address questions of admissibility, what evidence the court will allow, how expert opinions may be presented, and which statements can be relied upon. These decisions can narrow or broaden the issues that reach a jury or judge. They also influence strategy, which facts are emphasized, which are contested, and which may never be heard at trial. Throughout this period, communication with the public is deliberately restrained. Authorities provide factual updates without detail, mindful of the risk that speculation poses to fairness. This restraint is particularly important in domestic cases, where narratives can form quickly and harden before evidence is tested. Courts depend on impartiality. Maintaining it requires discipline from investigators, prosecutors, and media alike. The broader social context continues to frame how the case is understood. Domestic violence remains a national concern in Australia, and each fatal case reverberates beyond the individuals involved. Advocacy groups stress that outcomes like this rarely arise from a single moment. They are often the endpoint of escalating harm. At the same time, officials caution against assuming a uniform pattern in every case. Evidence must speak for itself. Within the community, responses remain subdued but reflective. Vigils and messages acknowledge loss without amplifying conjecture. Conversations focus on support and prevention rather than blame. This tone mirrors a growing recognition that public discourse can either aid or hinder justice, depending on how responsibly it is conducted. For the victim's family, the passage of time brings its own strain. As proceedings move forward, the case becomes a recurring presence. Dates to remember, documents to review, hearings to attend or await. Support services remain crucial during this phase, helping families navigate a process that can feel both distant and intrusive. Courts aim to treat families with respect while preserving the rights of the accused. Balancing these imperatives is an enduring challenge. From an institutional perspective, the case test systems designed to respond to domestic incidents, police training, risk assessment, and interagency coordination are often revisited in the wake of tragedies, not as commentary on a specific case, but as part of continuous improvement. These reviews acknowledge a difficult reality. Intervention can reduce risk, but it cannot eliminate it entirely, especially when violence escalates rapidly. As legal preparation continues, expert testimony becomes increasingly significant. Specialists may be called to explain forensic findings, interpret data, or provide context on injury patterns and timelines. Their role is not to decide guilt, but to assist the court in understanding technical material. Defense counsel will scrutinize credentials, methods, and conclusions, reinforcing the adversarial process that underpins reliability. The court's role during this phase is managerial, as well as judicial. Judges oversee schedules, rule on motions, and ensure that proceedings remain focused and fair. These decisions shape the pace and scope of the case, often determining what the fact finder will ultimately consider. In serious matters, careful case management helps prevent delay while protecting rights. As attention shifts from investigation to adjudication, the narrative narrows. The law does not seek to tell every story, only those relevant to responsibility. Emotional truths coexist with legal truths, but the court's mandate is specific, to assess evidence according to defined standards. This distinction can be difficult for observers, yet it is central to justice. The significance of this stage lies in its discipline. The system resists haste, recognizing that outcomes must be defensible and final. Each procedural step, however technical, serves a purpose in ensuring that conclusions are not merely plausible, but proven. For Sydney, the case sits quietly within the city's broader rhythms. Daily life continues, even as the legal process unfolds. This contrast, ordinary routines alongside extraordinary loss, is a familiar feature of serious crime. It underscores why justice systems operate deliberately, to provide stability amid disruption. As the matter approaches its next milestones, expectations remain measured. There is no promise of closure in the emotional sense, only the assurance of process. Evidence will be heard, arguments made, and decisions reached according to law. In this third phase, the case is defined by preparation and testing. The facts are being refined, the arguments sharpened, and the standards clarified. What began as a domestic disturbance call has become a careful examination of responsibility under Australia's most serious criminal law. As this case enters its final phase, the work of the justice system becomes at once narrower and heavier. Narrower because the questions before the court are now specific and defined by law. Heavier because the answers carry permanent consequences. What began as a domestic disturbance call in a Sydney suburb has progressed through investigation, charge, and pre-trial scrutiny, and now stands before the legal process tasked with determining responsibility for the death of Aisha Khan. In Australian criminal proceedings, the closing stage is governed by discipline. The court must set aside emotion and public reaction, focusing instead on what can be established to the required standard. That standard, proof beyond reasonable doubt, is intentionally exacting. It exists to ensure that verdicts are not only decisive, but just. In cases involving irreversible loss, this rigor is essential. For prosecutors, the final presentation is about coherence and credibility. Evidence gathered over months must be assembled into a narrative that explains events clearly and persuasively. This does not mean filling every gap with speculation. It means demonstrating how independent strands of evidence align. Timelines must make sense. Forensic conclusions must be supported by method. Statements must be consistent with physical findings. The burden rests entirely with the state. For the defense, the task is equally vital. By testing the prosecution's claims, challenging inferences, highlighting ambiguity, and probing procedure, the defense ensures that conclusions are earned, not assumed. This adversarial exchange is not a technical formality. It is the mechanism by which reliability is established. The system depends on it to avoid irreversible error. The accused, Imran Khan, remains in custody following refusal of bail. That status reflects the seriousness of the charge, not a determination of guilt. The presumption of innocence remains intact until a verdict is reached. This principle can be uncomfortable in cases that provoke strong feelings, but it is foundational to fairness. Judicial oversight is especially prominent at this stage. Judges ensure that proceedings remain focused on admissible evidence and relevant issues. They rule on objections, guide the presentation of expert testimony, and instruct the fact finder, whether judge or jury, on the law to be applied. These instructions are critical, translating complex legal standards into practical guidance for decision-making. Expert evidence, where presented, must be carefully explained. Forensic conclusions are not self-executing. They require context, limitations, and transparent methodology. Courts are attentive to the difference between probability and certainty, correlation and causation. This caution is deliberate. The law does not demand perfection, but it demands honesty about what evidence can and cannot show. Throughout the proceedings, restraint remains a defining feature. Authorities and responsible media avoid speculation, recognizing that narratives formed outside the courtroom can distort judgment. This discipline protects the integrity of the process and respects the rights of all involved, especially the victim's family, who deserve outcomes grounded in truth rather than conjecture. For Aisha Khan's loved ones, the closing phase can be the most taxing. The approach of judgment brings finality closer, but it also requires revisiting painful details in formal settings. Support services remain essential during this period, helping families navigate a system that must remain impartial even as it confronts profound loss. Courts aim to maintain dignity throughout, acknowledging harm without prejudging outcome. Beyond the courtroom, the case continues to resonate within broader conversations about domestic violence in Australia. Each fatal incident reinforces a difficult reality. Violence in private spaces can escalate rapidly, often beyond the reach of timely intervention. While courts do not adjudicate social policy, their decisions inform how society understands responsibility, prevention, and the limits of response.